All right. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. I know many of you have seen a webinar in a continuing education class. So those of you that are attorneys, accountants, engineers, utilities, things like that, and welcome aboard. Some of this is going to look familiar, but rest assured you're going to get some information out of this that's beyond the scope of a continuing education class. There's a different objective when I or any of us do those. And today it's going to be more about, well, first of all, current events as of yesterday that affected many of us on the call, and other new things, so don't think this is the same thing. All throughout, there's updated information, different things that's I've never talked about before. So welcome aboard. Not only am I going to speak about how a single cyber attack can put your company out of business, but we're going to cover 5+ steps to protect your organization, starting immediately. You don't have to buy some of the stuff that I'm going to tell you throughout the slide deck that you can do immediately. As I like to say, it's hacker smackdown. What you're going to learn today, and incidentally, those of you that are in front of your keyboard, if you would like something that, if you've seen me speak, if there's something I haven't addressed before, type in and let me know what you want to learn, and I'll address that either during or at the end of the slides. You're going to learn the who, what, why, and hows of the entire cybersecurity industry. That's the bad guys, the good guys. We call them black hat and white hat. The gray hats, and the sheer scale of it, and why they do it, and how they do it, and what issues and risk are we all facing. We're going to talk about the difference between InfoSec and IT, or Infotech, information technology. I'm going to talk about the gold standard of cybersecurity. In other words, this isn't IronTech telling you what you need to do. We're going to talk about independent, actually a couple of independent organizations, among others, that you should pay attention to in order to get your defense in place to protect your organization and yourself, your family, your colleagues. I'm going to tell you what the solution to it is. And finally, where to start. Now, many of you that have seen me speak, or either in person or in a webinar, the feedback is always I have a lot of passion, and there's a good reason for that. A few years ago, in 2015, if you remember all of the kill list that ISIS published, you know, this particular one is an actual ad from the United Cyber Caliphate recruiting lone wolves in the New York City Met area, mostly politicians, law enforcement, military targets. We want them dead. Shut them down. This is ISIS's Cyber Command, or NSA, and they were very sophisticated at this time. As a result of a hacking of a database, and online retailer in Chicago, presumably, I was placed on a kill list. So this directly affected me, as in physically affected me, just like an interruption in water supply, or a compromise of my financial records, or maybe my lawsuit, maybe engineering drawings that are intellectual property. But physically, this to this day, this still is something I'm going to live with the rest of my life. So yes, I am somewhat passionate about it, and I've been in cybersecurity for a few years now, and so now you know the whys. I should be chief evangelist. So, oh, and by the way, since I'm not restricted by a normal hour educational series, I might go over. So hopefully you've got some time and you want to stick around in case I do. It's a brand new presentation. So who needs this? Do you question about, do you really need to worry about Russian criminals or Chinese hacking, North Korea, Iran? Do you think you might be too small? We're going to cover that. If you don't understand the real risk that cyber attacks pose to your organization, we're going to cover that. We're going to cover the best cyber defense strategy. And this isn't just IronTech saying it or Tom saying it. It is standards, best of breed, accepted InfoSec implementations and practices that are the best strategy to defend yourself. I'm always talking about the difference between IT and InfoSec. And if you finally just want to sleep better at night, and what I mean by that is so often, so often, I don't expect you to be InfoSec specialist. Even if you're in IT, I don't expect that. It's a different specialty. But if you're an attorney, I want you to be a good attorney. That's what your specialty is. We can't be experts in every field. If you're a neurosurgeon, I want you to be the best neurosurgeon you can. If you deliver water, I want it to be the cleanest, safest water, uninterrupted. That's what I mean about anxiety. You simply aren't an expert in the field, and you just hope it doesn't happen to you. And perhaps it keeps you up at night. You're going to know what to do, what the first steps are. As always, we're going to take a look at recent headlines. Accounting firm suffers cyber attack. All systems offices shut. And you guys see these headlines. You hear about them on CNN, New York Times. Here's an engineering firm that paid a relatively small ransom, $1,300, but it affected their servers and their backups, which means they couldn't restore from backup. That's a bad tactic. You've got to have a backup that is off-site. Ransomware proof. Easily preventable. Law firms' reported cyber attacks are the tip of the iceberg. Vast majority of these go unreported because I don't need to tell you what a data breach that's public can do to your reputation. At the end of this, you're going to know what will keep you off the 5 o'clock news, or what will keep you out of your local newspaper headlines or the radio news station, or simply being embarrassed and suffering reputation damage. Dangerous stuff. Hackers tried to poison water supply of Florida town. We're going to do a high-level forensic examination of that in an upcoming slide. And another one, very similar. Nearly 1/5 of law firms show signs of compromise. If you've been a victim of a ransomware attack and your network and all your systems weren't examined forensically, I assure you, you are still compromised with things that are just waiting to be exploited. And that's been true for the last few years. I haven't seen a ransomware attack, successful or unsuccessful, that did not have additional payloads that were dormant, undetected. And it goes on and on and on. These headlines are last 5 years, and it covers all industries. Now, we specialize in a few verticals, engineering, law, utilities. We have some medical offices. That's not really one we're targeting, but, HIPAA laws and things like that. It's really bad. It's growing at about a 350% annual rate, which compounds over time. So these two, well, everybody's familiar with the one right outside of Clearwater. It was on CNN, New York Times. And a hacker got into a totally negligently protected computer that controlled the water treatment of Oldsmar, Florida's water supply. But a lot of people don't realize that before that one, before the Florida incident, there was one in California that went unpublicized, which was more or less the same type of attack. I don't know if the community was the same size. But let's just take a brief look at the analysis. I was hoping to do some more of these, but we simply don't have time. With the attack vector, the defense failures, things like that, storyline. This one's a relatively simple attack. It was what we call in the business script kiddie. It required 0 skills. They were able to access a TeamViewer remote access. There is nothing inherently unsafe about TeamViewer. We sometimes use TeamViewer, but that was the attack vector. That was the application that the hacker got into. But it was configured in such a manner that it had little to 0 security. In fact, it was negligence. They actually turned off the firewall to this computer to make it more convenient to access it remotely. They did what's known in the business as DMZing a particular computer. It's called demilitarized zone. And that totally bypasses the firewall. That is a huge, huge no-no. And we typically see that when IT, and I don't mean to pick on IT, and we're going to talk about why IT and IS is different, but we see that when IT's under pressure to get it set up or make it easy. We don't want to have a hassle. We just need to get in there and look at it, and nobody's going to hack us. We're too small. The IP address of this computer and what it was used for was public information. Not on the dark web. I mean, on the real internet. And on a security site, because what we are all trying to do as white hat hackers is to raise and elevate everybody's awareness of these issues. And so that was not a security first culture. Not only did they DMZ the PC, but everybody was using a common set of credentials. This was not someone from Russia, more than likely. I haven't heard who they've identified, but I could see easily a malicious ex-employee, current employee, but it likely wasn't even that. It was likely just somebody that found the computer, saw what it was there, and just tinkered. But obviously, Infosec was not involved. They didn't have a specialist there to say, this is a no-no. We've got to have security, regardless of how inconvenient that may be. And it's really not that inconvenient just to add a little more security. We got to go over the common myths. For those of you that haven't been through a webinar or seen me speak, just bear with us. We are too small. Actual IT friend of mine, been in the business years, decades, medical IT. And he made a quote about asking me to speak in front of a nonprofit organization. And I said, sure, I'd love to. And he says, well, they probably don't need cybersecurity because they're too small. Nuh-uh. These attacks are done at scale. The ones you see on CNN, like Colonial Pipeline, JBS, I don't know if they covered what happened yesterday, but those are big targeted attacks for big ransom or big extortion demands. The vast majority of attacks are to people like you. They're not demanding $5 million, they're demanding $5,000. Just enough money for them to get a high conversion rate to small to medium-sized businesses. And make no mistake, this is a business at scale. They're automatically attacking indiscriminate shotgun-type attacks on maybe all the water utilities in the United States, all of the members of the New York State Bar Association, the Arkansas Society of Accountants. They don't care who you are. They don't care where you are. They're just looking at the numbers. If they send out 160,000 phishing emails, they need 1% conversion rate. That's 1,600. average ransom of $10,000 each, you do the math. That's all they're looking at. They don't even care. In fact, the Colonial Pipeline, they didn't even know they had attacked infrastructure until after the fact. It didn't change. I think it actually raised their ransom demand, but they apologized and said, we didn't mean to cause this much disruption. But your ransom is now $4.5 million. Good cybersecurity is expensive. It does cost more than going to Best Buy and buying Norton antivirus, shrink wrap antivirus. But it's not unaffordable at all. What is expensive is losing your reputation, getting fined perhaps from the Office of Civil Rights that enforces HIPAA violations, or getting talked to and possibly fined and committing a felony with the Department of Treasury because you paid a ransom. Over 40% of small businesses that suffer a security breach or event go out of business in 6 months. That is what's expensive. Antivirus is not good enough. That's not all there is, and it's about one notch above useless. I'm going to tell you what's better by far. And if you're a client of ours, it's non-negotiable. That's how serious we take it, and that's how important it is. If you do nothing but that, if you get the right one, you're not going to have a ransomware attack. Or nothing is 100%. The NSA was breached. Anybody can be breached. But none of our clients had a serious breach by ripping out antivirus and putting in the right tools. Cybersecurity insurance, by the vast majority of people, are bought because they simply don't know what to do. At the end of this, you're going to know what to do. You're going to know what the first step and the next step and the next step and what you need to do it right and get those enterprise-grade administrative controls, policies, procedures, the technical controls to replace your antivirus and cybersecurity awareness training, the physical controls, all of those things. And the object is not to have to use cybersecurity insurance. You think of all the insurance you have. That's the last thing you want to have to use, especially life insurance. But even homeowners insurance, automobile insurance, it's the last thing you want to do. You wear your seatbelt so you don't get injured in a car accident because you don't want to go to near death simply because you got automobile insurance and medical insurance. That's putting the cart before the horse. Get your cybersecurity defense in place first. Can't do it yourself anymore at all. It's not sufficient. You're just a ticking time bomb. You can't buy enterprise grade off the shelf. You got to go to Infosec or other service providers that provide those type of technical controls. Now, you can do your administrative control. You can say, okay, no more sharing passwords. You can go and buy a password manager directly and train everybody on how to use it, go through the hassle of that, and then lead them through getting over the hump that, this is too much of a pain. Oh, and while I'm on the topic, if you do get everybody over the hump with a password manager, a week or 2 or 3, they're going to wonder how they ever lived without it. So there are some things that you can do yourself, and as I said at the top of the webinar, you are going to have some actionable items that if you don't want to hire us or another MSSP, you need to put in place. You can get your own cybersecurity awareness training, and that'll cut your risk in half if you implement it properly. And finally, another myth that I understand this completely too, because once again, this is a very specialized industry. Imagine all of the specialists under the roof of a hotel. Well, there's a lot of specialists there too, right? But imagine all the specialists under a big hospital. You have your neurologist, your rheumatologist, your registered nurses, your phlebotomist, your oncologist. There's at least that many specialties in the black hat, white hat, gray hat cybersecurity industry all over the world. There's criminals that specialize in doing nothing but exploiting server backdoors, specialize in doing nothing but DDoS attacks, which if you've got a Verizon phone, you may have suffered phone outages yesterday. The week before, it was another telco provider, backhaul stuff that who you're actually buying the service from can't do anything about. I know because some of our clients were affected by it, the one yesterday. About a week ago, an organization that was impersonating REvil or REvil, criminal gang in Russia, was trying to extort Level 3. That's a backbone provider in the United States, all over the world actually. Internet, VoIP, voice over IP services. It affected a lot of telco providers. And they were extorting $4.5 million to turn off the attack on their network. I didn't see it on CNN. We're working on getting an email that explains what we call in the business. I don't know. We don't know the storyline, but explain how it happened and why it affected everybody. But anyway, getting back to IT firm, what I'm trying to illustrate with that is we have all of the technology pace of change that IT has, plus the cops and robbers, geopolitical dynamics, responding to zero-day threats, brand new intel from the FBI or DHS or private security alerts, Microsoft and Apple and Google and Firefox, Mozilla. And we have to stay up to date on that every single day, every waking moment, literally. And that's beyond the scope of IT, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. So who are the hackers? Well, in the InfoSec, we've got to understand what their objectives are, their resources, their tactics, techniques, and procedures to better protect you. To better protect our clients, better protect us. And so we can build better defenses and continuously to improve those. It's not something you set once and forget. Once again, we got to stay on top of it. So who are these hackers? Well, in addition to the terrorist groups that do a lot of ransomware because they need US dollars, first group on deck are criminal enterprises. They're in Russia, probably most, but they're also in Ukraine, North Korea, China, mostly Asian, but they're criminals and they're vertically specialized. Some of them specialize in doing ransomware attacks. Others specialize in exploiting keyloggers. That's the criminal threat group, organized crime. I mentioned United Cyber Caliphate and ISIS. Another threat actor is nation states. Russia specializes in, their objective is to weaken Western democracies, especially NATO members. China exploits and steals intellectual property. Some experts say the amount of intellectual property stolen by China over the past few years is the greatest transfer of wealth in human history. And all you've got to do is look at the changes in that country in just the last 20 years, and it is phenomenal. They've gone from a third world country to a first world country, and in some ways surpasses their technology and everything surpasses some of the best cities on earth. It's incredible, 20-year change. Hacktivist groups, Anonymous, WikiLeaks, they have causes. That's another group we have to take into consideration. Those we don't worry too much for our clients because we specialize in small to medium-sized businesses. But if you're a patent attorney, yeah, we've got to think about that. Or maybe your law firm represents clients that another hacktivist group don't like. Maybe you have a client that Greenpeace is, if you're the oil and gas business, maybe in the Gulf of Mexico, I don't know if Greenpeace goes there, but you get my point. We have to consider that. But your biggest concern, by far, is insider threats. Now, I know you're thinking I'm talking about malicious insiders, disgruntled employees, former employees, just seeking havoc or revenge. I'm not talking about that. That's important. But by far, your biggest threat are non-malicious insiders. These are people that are conned, socially engineered, psychologically manipulated to open that email attachment and fire off that ransomware attack. Over 90% of successful breaches have an insider helping them out. Non-malicious, they didn't intend to. They're just trying to do their job. But it's over 90%. That attack would not have occurred in over 90% of security incidences had an insider unknowingly let them in. Had they not unknowingly let them in. Okay? That's our biggest problem with ransomware. Now, there's other distribution methods. Another one is compromising a website. I don't speak enough about making sure your website's protected. Trying to get the cheapest hosting for your website is a surefire way of infecting every site visitor with ransomware or other malware. The websites cannot be taken casually anymore. You've got to secure those as well. So make sure you don't leave that out. So our IT firm does security. Let's look at what the objectives differences are between InfoSec and Infotech, IT and IS. Information technology, first and foremost, is bottom line focused. They are in place, whether you got a staff or you outsource it or however you maybe you do it yourself. You have a small office, you're a little bit of a nerd like me, and I can do most of this stuff. But it's all about improving efficiency and productivity and minimizing frustration, just keeping the business up and running. That's the main objectives of IT. Let them do that. You do that. That's their objective. IS wants to protect all the stakeholders. It's you, your organization, your law firm, your water utility, your accounting firm, engineering firm, your clients, your customers, your vendors, your employees, your colleagues, and anything that is a stakeholder in your organization. We're worried about what the risks are. At any given point in time, I might add, because the risks change over time. There's always new technology threats. There's always new tactics, techniques, and procedures. We've got to monitor and respond quickly, especially if you outsource your IT, but even if you have an in-house staff. They're going to prioritize over a server being down because that impacts productivity. More often than not, I know there are exceptions to the rule, and those of you that you do IT and you do that, you drop everything. If there's a cyber attack, great. Sometimes it's not easy to identify the seriousness of a cyber attack because you may not have the tools and the operational specialist, the security operations specialist that got experience in saying, oh, this is a bad one. You don't have 5 minutes, right? Somebody didn't open that email. And you didn't have the technology to detect that things were being deployed. There was a compromise the other day where you didn't even have to open the email, and it would infect your computer. And if you didn't respond quickly with software patches and updates, you could have been hit by that. And we want to stay on top of geopolitical factors. The Putin-Biden summit in Geneva a couple of months back, that was important to us in the InfoSec world, and we saw the threat landscape change somewhat. In fact, we're still seeing it change because of that. So what this all means, and it's real easy for the layperson to say, well, why can't the U.S. government fix it? Russia has the largest cyber mercenary force in the world. They have a majority of the criminals in the world. Their objectives, the government and the Russian criminals, are somewhat aligned to weaken Western democracy, create chaos. So they are basically protected by the U.S. or the Russian government. If they're if they're arrested overseas or in another country, they're extradited to Russia. They're immediately let loose, no matter how bad the cybercrime was. So they can unleash attacks against countries, and they practically devastated Ukraine about 4 years ago. We didn't see it because we had so much other noise on our news networks, but if it had been much calmer, that would have been major, major news. It was actually a seminal event in Ukraine, like 9/11 is to us. They call it pre-NotPetya and post-NotPetya. NotPetya was the name of the attack. China has the largest intellectual property cyber attack force. This means that they probably have hooks into Boeing, other military vendors, just waiting to be exploited, or they've already done it, or they're currently doing it. They're really, really good at it. North Korea and Iran, not only do they do ransomware, but they also tinker with infrastructure attacks. Another example between IT and IS is when a geopolitical military incident happens, the first thought through my mind is, what's the cyber blowback going to be? If the U.S. accidentally ditches an Iranian MiG in the Persian Gulf, Iran is not going to do an all-out attack on the United States military because they would quickly be overwhelmed. They're going to do cyber, though. We're the most vulnerable nation on earth. We're the most technologically... We have more things connected to the internet than any other nation on the planet. That makes us the most vulnerable. Also, we have prized productivity, efficiency, and the bottom line over security for decades, and it's coming back to bite us. And all the other nations, all the other criminals, terrorists know that. And it gives them a great advantage in responding. I think that before we created Cyber Force, we should have done a before we create a Space Force, we should have done a Cyber Force. I don't think the other one's wrong. I just think we should have done Cyber Force first. And there's going to be a day soon to where there will be a Cyber Force, and you'll just think of it just another part: Marines, Air Force, Navy, Army, Reserves, whatever, National Guard, arguably. It's going to be a cyber force. I don't know what they'll call it, but there was a time when airplanes weren't part of military tactics, right? So Air Force was a little hard to get used to, I would imagine, at that time. And finally, the USA does not spend. It's not just the government, it's all of us. We just simply don't spend. What the government does spend on is offensive weapons and tools. NSA, CIA, intelligence agencies like NSA, they spend 90% of their money on offensive attack tools. We got a reminder last week, in fact a week ago today, that Department of Treasury wants to remind everybody that it's against the law. It's a felony to pay ransom to people on the SDN list. So what is the SDN list? These are individuals, groups, nation states that are sanctioned financially. Like, you can't send money, you can't sell goods and services to North Korea. Well, and Russia has criminal gangs, individuals, and Russia has sanctions. You can't you can't send money to anybody named on the SDN list. It's against the law. They sent, and this has been against the law for decades. If you're sanctioned, here's what you can and you can't do as a U.S. citizen. They sent a reminder out last week. The U.S. government strongly discourages all private companies and citizens from paying ransom or extortion demands. Why did they send that out last week? I believe that they're going to outright ban Bitcoin or any payment for ransomware. Now, think about that. If you don't even have the option of paying the ransom, say it's a small ransom, $5,000, and you know you're going to go out of business or your reputation is going to suffer irreparable damage, $5,000, as much as you hate it, might be a bargain. If they take that off the table, now you've got a really more serious decision to make. And they sent that reminder out last week. We see that in other alerts, by the way. We had another one sent out earlier this week. Oh, wait a minute. That exploit's been around. That vulnerability in software has been around for, the first announcement was 6 months ago, and now they're circling back around. What's the reason for that? We're taking steps to protect our client because they can't always say what the reason is. There's probably chatter, intel that says that particular vulnerability is beginning to be attacked. All right, this is the beginning of what you can do. It's not me saying it, it's the White House. Specifically, it's the head of cyber for NSA, directly reports to the president. Was and is it's the single point of contact for possible threats, current attacks. It's the best we've got right now. So Ann Neuberger's deputy assistant, which she was acting head at the time, 2 corporate executives and business leaders. What we urge you to do to protect against the threat of ransomware. Now, I know there's a lot of other threats out there, but each and every person on this webinar can get hit with ransomware. Remember, it's done at scale automatically. Most of the time, the whole thing's automatic. Beginning to end. Just launch it and sit back and collect the Bitcoin if you're a bad guy. She sent that out the beginning of June. A couple of excerpts. The private sector also has a critical responsibility to protect against these threats. She knows the U.S. government they can't fix all of this. We've got a critical responsibility to make us safer as a nation. We're the most vulnerable nation on earth. All organizations must recognize that no company is safe from being targeted by ransomware, regardless of size or location. It's not me saying that. You talk to any Infosec specialist and they'll tell you the same thing. See, it's the White House saying it. It's the U.S. government saying it. We urge you to take ransomware crime seriously. Anne went on to iterate 5 specific things to do as soon as you can. Number 1, use multi-factor authentication. That is a third piece of credential. To log into a website, to log onto your online banking, to log into your remote desktop. Remember Oldsmar, Florida, the water utility. They didn't have MFA. It was too inconvenient. But it's a time-sensitive, randomly generated number, typically, that is added to username and password. You should use that everywhere. We require it for clients doing remote desktop. In fact, internally, we require it on our desktop, even physically. Number 2 on our list is an EDR. What is an EDR? Remember in an earlier slide I said antivirus about 1 step above useless? The way antivirus works is it detects signatures. You know, it has to be updated constantly, each and every day, sometimes multiple times a day. And they're downloading new virus signatures. Okay? So when it sees a signature of an application, you know, a binary signature of a virus, it can respond. The problem with that is, and it has been since antivirus was invented, and there's many reasons why there's problems with that technique, is some antivirus vendors don't update their signature. Well, actually, none of them do it timely. You know, Norton may be 6 months behind a new virus that McAfee fixes today, and they got a signature in there, and vice versa. There's not one that's better than the other. They're, like I said, they're just not good anymore. The NSA's offensive tools are available for download on the dark web, and they're being used against us. It's far more advanced now than what we're accustomed to. Arguably, the world's most premier offensive weapons are being used against us. So what it takes now is a class of products called EDR, or at least I call it that. Depending on the vendor, it goes by a lot of different three-letter acronyms. XDR, EPP, MDR. It's another reason why you need an Infosec Specialist to keep up with all the marketing terms. But basically, this class of applications, they don't rely on virus signatures. They use artificial intelligence or machine learning to look at the behavior of the user and the computer and predict whether a attack is about to happen. In the case of a ransomware attack, typically it'll be maybe an Excel spreadsheet. So an EDR will see the user open an email, open the Excel spreadsheet, and then it sees the Excel spreadsheet call a macro. It's already alerted because it knows, it's learned through watching attacks 24 hours a day, every second of the day, all over the world, that this could be an attack. Then it sees the macro call the Windows encryption service. Then it knows it's an attack, and it immediately freezes the service or the application, the encryption application. Nowhere in there is there a virus. Ransomware does not rely on viruses to do the attack. It uses what's built into Microsoft Windows and Microsoft Office. There's no virus, period. Only through AI can those types of attacks be stopped. And I don't need to remind you that ransomware is our number one threat. That's why it's number 2 on Ann's list. That it's simply not negotiable. It has to be done. Number 3 is encryption. That means you encrypt your data that's stored everywhere, or data at rest, if you're a nerd. That's what it's called technically. It's all data at rest must be encrypted. So what that means is especially in the case of portable devices like laptops and phones and stuff, make sure the operating system is encrypting that data as it's read or as it's written. So if you lose a laptop, somebody can't get the data off of it. The same thing applies to servers. We encrypt all of our server drives because you never know if somebody breaks into your office and steals servers. They still have a value, believe it or not. And we don't want that data easily accessible. So if you've got a layer of security with maybe MFA on your server, and maybe you got a physical lock on the server, and maybe the server room's locked, don't forget that last step. Turn on disk encryption. Modern disk encryption has, you won't even notice a performance in disk. It won't slow the computer down, bottom line. Number 4 on our list is a skilled security team. That goes back to Infosec. And by skilled, not only do they keep track of all of this stuff, but they incorporate new threat intel continuously into defenses. Those are the 5 things from the White House that needs to be done in part of the webinar title. So what we like to use and in fact, it's baked into our DNA. Oh, incidentally, we were doing those 5 things long before that letter came out. But getting back to this slide, the Nist Cybersecurity Framework. It's NIST is a part of U.S. Department of Commerce, National Institute of Standards and Technology. They're the ones that keep track of what a pound is, what an ounce is, what a ton is, through nuclear physics, atomic clocks, all of this stuff. They came out with this cybersecurity framework in 2014, and in 17 they updated it to 1.1. Well, here we are at 2021. That's a pretty darn good framework right out of the gates. Generally considered the gold standard around the world, and what its intention is to provide guidance to assess, manage, and reduce everyone's cybersecurity risk. And this is used by businesses of all sizes and governments all over the world. There are some others out there, but I consider this the gold standard. We are a Nist Csf MSSP. How many abbreviations could I get in one sentence, Kenzie? So if you guys go down the rabbit hole, there's a lot of dot this, dot that, just a lot of technical mumbo jumbo, but it's basically 5 things. Number 1 is identify. You got to acknowledge you have vulnerabilities, and what are they? So that it goes through the whole thing. If you follow it, it's not an assessment. It's just providing the things you need to look out for to discover your vulnerabilities. Okay, that's a distinction I want to talk about at the end. Then from that, you've got to implement administrative, technical, and physical controls to protect it. Number 3, perhaps most importantly, is you've got to have policies and procedures in place to detect anomalies. I'm not talking about attacks. I'm talking about anomalies, things that don't smell right. That's a weird thing. If I've been trained that something weird like that might be a security breach, I'm going to send an email to IronTech. Or this email looks bad. We get emails every day, people saying, clients saying, hey, is this a threat? Before I open it, is this a threat? That's part of cybersecurity awareness. Slow down. It's a security first. Without the training or the education, they might have just said, well, I got antivirus, so I'm going to open it up and just hope something doesn't happen. Just slow down. Don't let social engineering create a catastrophic security event in your organization. Then you've got to have a response. All an antivirus can do is automatically respond. And if it doesn't have the signature for the virus, 0 response. But the response has to be, and this goes back to the White House letter, it's got to be done both automatically, which our EDRs do that, but we also manually respond 24/7, all the time. We never stop. It's relentless. Even when the EDR is successful at mitigating an attack, somebody's looking at it. Is there additional payloads that were delivered that the EDR missed? What nooks and crannies? What was the storyline of the attack? What was the attack vector? The reason we do those things is not only to make sure there wasn't other payloads distributed, but to figure out how they got in there in the first place. A vulnerability that was undiscovered, like what happened to Colonial Pipeline, because they don't have a chief information security officer. I believe that's why they got, because apparently the CIO, the IT, head of IT, was highly regarded. But without a CISO, and by the way, by the end of this year, all the Fortune 500 companies, or maybe it's Fortune 100 companies, will have a security officer, chief, in the C-suite. So they've got the CEO's ear. They don't have to worry about finance shutting down their budget for cybersecurity. They get to go straight to the head guy and make their case and explain the risk. So the risk is This is going to cost X amount of dollar. It's going to cost this amount of pain to operations. It's going to impact IT and the help desk like this. But the risk just overwhelms all of those things and the cost. We've got to have the budget for this. Now, Colonial was simply an administrative control that was failed to be followed. It was a legacy VPN connection that wasn't protected by MFA. It was overlooked and it was unused. It was protected by username and password. And presumably it was so old, and I'm just a presumption on my part, but presumably it was so old that I doubt that it even had complex passwords, probably a dictionary attack, maybe 8 or 10 characters that automatically can be cracked in seconds or minutes. So you got to have that response part. That was number 4 on the White House letter. And then finally, you got to plan for recover. And the biggest hole in the recovery process is failing to monitor automatically and manually backups. If you're not paying someone, if you're not paying someone on staff, your IT company, your IT staff, whatever, to both automatically and manually check those backups to make sure they're there, to make sure they're good, to test them, do test restores, then you don't have a backup. You've got a cybersecurity policy that may or may not work. Oh, I checked the wrong box. Oh, I checked it last month. The backups have to be checked continuously. And while I'm on the subject of backups, different tactics and techniques and procedures have to be put in place to protect you multiple ways. I would doubt that we have any client that we don't have multiple types of backups for multiple reasons. I'd have to go back and look, but I don't think we do. It's about the layers, defense in depth. So what's the solution? Number 1, use Infosec Specialist. This and some of these are in order. This is the very first thing you should do. And those are known, if you want to outsource it. If you want to insource it, you hire Infosec, not IT. You hire Infosec. And don't overburden IT by putting it on them. When we go into firms that have an IT staff or they outsource it to another IT company, they appreciate it and they're relieved more often than not that the leadership sees, they have the vision to understand that you can't make a neurologist out of a neurosurgeon. So I can't stress that enough. But it's not just me saying it. The White House says it too. And everybody in the industry, good guys and bad guys, know that's the first step in doing it the right way. So in the business, like Kinsey said at the top, the introduction, it's an MSSP if you're outsourcing. You got to assess immediately. We recommend using the Nist Csf, not just go to a company that says they do security and then they do something and they say this, this, and this. Can I just rattle off things you need? Yeah, I know you need an EDR if you don't have one, but that's not all. We've got to go and do the diligence, the hard work of a proper assessment. And that's the first step in understanding the condition and where you are, the condition of your ship, right? Done properly, it's going to be a layered security strategy using best-of-breed controls. Now, those controls can be an EDR, technical control. They could be security awareness training, which arguably is it's really an administrative control, but it uses technical tools. Or it could simply be saying, all right, nobody's reusing passwords across many websites. You use your pet's name plus your first son's birth date. That's not a good password. It needs to be complex. It needs to be long, preferably random generated from a password manager. That's an administrative control. That's actually something you can buy off the shelf. If you want a recommendation, we're a Keeper partner. We train our users that deploy Keeper. get them up to speed, support it, things like that. I'm not a big fan of LastPass anymore. I do like 1Password. So if you wrote those down, you can buy those yourself and do your own implementation. But that's a best of breed control. Some of you with Macs, we're a Mac house. I don't have a problem with keychain. Macs or Apple's password, among other things, it does password management. I don't have a problem with that because of the way it's stored and as secure as Macs are. But do not store credentials in Firefox or Internet Explorer or Chrome. That's a bad policy. And it's really inconvenient anyway. It's really a waste of time. Get a good password manager if you want to upgrade your defensive strategy, that particular layer. So example, EDR, MFA, training. And number 4, that 24/7 monitoring. That is a critical component. We have literally stopped. I'll go back. The worst one that we've seen, the worst one of a client of ours that we've seen, we responded within minutes. We had to shut a surgeon's office down. And it's a one-man surgeon office, 10, 15 people work there. Didn't like that very much, but we saw how quickly and how vicious this attack was, and knew and understood the technology behind it. And we had no choice. If we're going to prevent him from getting fined by HIPAA, possibly going out of business, reputation loss, headlines, local TV stations, it's critical that you respond in minutes. You may outsource your IT, and if it's they triage the support tickets, right? And you go, I got this problem. Well, if it's not mission critical, the company's not down or you're not down, it's going to be pushed to the bottom of the list. Like an email. If you send an email that you're suspicious about to an IT company, that's not part of their operational strategy to quickly respond to those. So if you don't get a response in 4 or 5 hours, you may say, well, I can't wait. I need to open this up because otherwise this vendor is going to shut us off. Instant or near instant response has to be there. Now, do we put the same weight behind an inquiry about a suspicious email as we do an all-out lateral attack? No. But the point is, we take it seriously, and we welcome that. It's not an annoyance to the help desk when we get those. We want it. Send them all to us if you're a client. Send everything that you think smells bad, and you'd be surprised how often. And while I'm on the subject, the days of emails with bad grammar, bad misspelled words, broken English, very bad graphics. Now that stopped 3 or 4 years ago. These are pros. These are the best con artists you can imagine. Imagine, probably most of us have encountered a con artist on the street. French Quarter is my best example, but I've been approached in Chicago, New York, and on the street, and somebody says, I tell you where you got them shoes, or my car's broken down. One of the best was in San Diego. Guy was in a polo shirt and khakis. He looked like another nerd, works for a tech company, and he got stranded without any money. He's a traveler, and it was polished, very polished. Same thing is happening in the cyber world. Those things are impeccable, and they can fool experts, including me. Some of it's timing, some of it's just luck. But make sure you got a good response team ready to go. You got to orchestrate all these things, or your security firm. Well, actually, all of y'all need to orchestrate all of these different things. And you got to believe in it. Don't make a managerial decision, which would be a proper managerial decision to say, I heard this Tom guy and I heard this other thing at another conference. all right, we got to take it seriously. Let's buy all this stuff and get the best we can. And then you treat it as an annoyance. You know, if you're the leader, whatever your head honcho title may be, or you're talking to the head honcho, you got to take it serious and you got to walk the talk. If you exempt yourself as a leader, owner, president, CEO, whatever it is, managing partner, from cybersecurity awareness training because you bill out $1,500 an hour, and your name shows at the bottom of the list on the employee scoring of awareness training, what do you think that does to the culture of your law firm, your accounting practice, your water utility? Why am I going to bother if the head honcho is not going to bother? He's not taking it seriously. They're not even monitoring the scores. It's leadership. That's a leadership decision. And you got to believe in it and you got to walk the talk. Don't say it's an annoyance. It's got to fade into the background just like technology does. Nobody gets upset when the computers are working properly. You don't go out of your way to compliment your IT firm when everything's working flawlessly. You may even be questioning why you're paying them. If you pay them monthly and everything works flawlessly, you may say, why do I pay these guys so much? That's because they're doing their job. They're responding. They're doing IT, and they're doing it first. Infosec does security first. But you've got to believe in it and act that way. All right. I know I went over, but here's the deal. We got two more after this one. So we always do this at the end, and it's the same deal. We normally charge $7.95 for an assessment, slightly different. But for everybody that's on the webinar, you got a special $4.95 that expires rather than midnight tonight. We've extended it for you guys because I know you're all over the nation. It's going to expire Friday at midnight, October 1st. And if you go to the website to sign up for it, the code is webinar. If you want to get on our threat advisory, our warning email list, and this is not a marketing email list. You're not going to get our marketing emails just because you're only on this list, but we periodically send advisories and warnings of intel that we think is actionable for our clients and users, because you guys are all small to medium-sized businesses. We do larger, but our sweet spot and what I personally enjoy doing is small to medium-sized businesses, single-person law firms. We've got scads of those. Anyway, if you want to sign up, go to threats.irontechsecurity.com. You don't know www, just type in threats.irontechsecurity.com. If you want to know more about the difference between IT and IS, or MSP versus MSSP, there's a download at mssp.irontechsecurity.com. If you want to take advantage of this and you don't want to go to that particular page on the web, you can call us or email us. We're easy to get along with. Do it if you want. Do it if you need. Just do something. Find you a security provider that does these things. Now, a couple of more slides and we're done. Do I have any questions? Okay, don't have any questions. Be thinking of some questions while I go through the next slide or two. So what does that security and risk assessment look like? We're going to show you, but what's included with it, we spend a minimum of 5 hours on consulting. And yes, it is an investment of your time, but remember that goes back to the leadership aspect of it. You've got to be bothered by this. And we're going to try to offload as much stuff as we can. But on our side, it's a minimum of 5 hours. If we do the minimum 5 hours, it's probably going to be 2 hours. It just depends on the assessment. But you're going to spend maybe an hour and a half getting that assessment done. We're going to give you a report, 20, 30 pages roughly, with recommendations to immediately, and then, of course, deployment. Depends on what the recommendations are, but it's going to absolutely improve your firm's security, and it's going to address the 5 things from the White House. It's going to address the Nist cybersecurity framework. It's not us saying you need to do this. Okay, it's like an independent party saying, oh, yeah, if IronTech puts this in, your Nist scores are dramatically lower. If you have an IT team, either in-house, outsourced, however you do it, please include them. We need them. IT makes IS better. It's going to make your assessment better. And IS makes IT better because it takes that off their plate. They can concentrate more on making that make sure that server does not go down. So we do want to include them. If you've got someone to answer to, other decision makers, other partners to go to, maybe the mayor, city administrator, the owner, if you got to get their approval, CFO, you got to go through finance, accounting, whatever. We'll be happy during this assessment to justify and include them and do a presentation if necessary explaining all of the things that you've learned to help them get up to speed, because it's a culture thing. Got to have buy-in. And that report is going to be NIST compliant and mapped. We are proving with an independent source, which is the U.S. Department of Commerce, NIST, that your vulnerability is critical. All users are informed and trained. That's a critical problem for this real-life assessment. Actually, this one's got 4 on it. Critical. Even the high ones need to be addressed. The next one's access permissions are managed. They're not doing that. But it maps on the right is the actual Nist CSF. So if we address that critical issue, we're doing exactly what NIST says needs to be done. And the NIST document is really good. There's other specifications and standards that may have impact on your cybersecurity, insurance rates, maybe certifications in your industry that you're ISO certified or COBIT or NIST compliant. All of this is documented. So if we address those vulnerabilities, you have a good chance to reduce your insurance rates. It's far and few in between these days, but I see more and more every day. But it could help get you along on your certifications. So it's worth every penny. If you spend the $4.95, you get the report, and you think it's a waste of your time, be happy to refund any money. It's no big deal. We're not asking for a credit card either. If you decide to go forward with what we recommend from us, we'll apply all that money to future services and products. It depends on what you end up getting to how that's applied, but it's all front loaded, right? It's in your benefit. So easy to get along with. So once again, just a review. If you guys got any questions, I'd be happy to hear them. Is Microsoft OneDrive for personnel files, I use it, is it secure? I don't trust Microsoft at all. They have followed the convenience, efficiency, and profitability mantra since day one. The only company that I would trust with cloud storage. Let me back up. Apple treats security and always has, much more seriously than Microsoft, Google, practically anyone other outside of the Infosec industry. I don't trust them. And it's not that they're. I'm reading a book right now by their chief security guy that really tried to get, or is trying to get, he's there now. He's trying to get Microsoft up to speed and improve security. But for decades, it was put on the back burner in favor of getting new versions and more money in the door. And I understand that. I'm not saying it was wrong 10 years ago. But they've got such a baked-in, weak, huge code base that they got a lot of fixes to do, and it's just overwhelming. No, I wouldn't trust it. It's a short answer. Are your services adaptable to the accounting, tax, solo practitioner practice or the small practice? Yeah, absolutely. That's our meat and potatoes, our bread and butter. It's not larger firms with on-site IT. We have very, very few of those type of clients. I think we are the only nationwide MSSP that is dedicated to small to medium-sized businesses. I would think that our average client size, we've got some that have hundreds, but we've got scads that are single accountants. I think we've got a few that even work from home. But anyway, they're not adaptable. They're specifically intended for that, John. So, hope that answered your question. Thank you guys for sticking on. That's very nice. I knew whenever I did the run-through that we were going to go over. So feel free to jump on with any more questions. Don't forget, it's right there on the screen. nist.irontechsecurity.com. And and there's no obligation if you just raise your hand and say I want to talk to you more about it. Do that before midnight Friday, so you can get the special. There's no obligation whatsoever. We don't ask for a credit card, none of that stuff. We or just ask us questions like John and Bruce just did. Be happy to talk to you about it. I do this day in and day out. That's my number one job, is to educate people. And yes, when you guys signed up for the webinar, did you think I might sell something? I did. I try to. Probably don't do as good a job of that as I do education, arguably. But, there's a greater good out there. And if you provide these types of services, that's extremely good. We think are the best. Somebody else may think they're the best. I'm not going to argue that point. But, we've got to improve the security for everyone, because the country is only as good as its weakest link. Think about how the country rallied around World War II. Gasoline was rationed. Women went to work in manufacturing plants, building airplanes. The men went overseas. It's the way it was done then. I'm not making a political issue. It's just the way it was done then. Everybody pitched in. People bought war bonds. They took the sacrifices. At the risk of sounding overzealous or exaggerating, which I've been accused of, but I see things that most people don't see. And I'm pulling punches a lot on this stuff. It's serious. And we all need to treat it this way. And if we all get our ducks in a row, we may never have a big, serious problem. But right now, the way we sit, all it takes is a match to light a wildfire and destroy hundreds of thousands of acres, especially out west. If an incident happens, political, militarily, or whatever, and Russia wants to seriously hurt us, they can do it. And nation states don't have a historical precedent for what is known as a calculated response or a measured response, proportionate response. We don't, as a world society, we just don't know how to measure that. Nations don't know how to measure it. And it could quickly escalate out of control. Reach out to us if you want to get on the list for my book that's coming out. It's supposed to, manuscript's almost finished, and but we'll let you know whenever it comes out. I meant to put a slide on here, but doing a promo. But anyway, if you just want to know about that, be happy to let you know when the book's ready. So yeah, I can't stress enough that everyone that's on this, I know the vast majority of you are small to medium-sized organizations. So that's our specialty. Yes. I think it's the nerd speak, maybe. Kenzie, you want to chime in here?
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely possible. I'd assume that's what it is. And I mean, you do reference the larger firms, but of course, we do specialize in the small to medium sized businesses. So,
All right. Thank you for the thank you, John. I'm glad you made it. And having said that, we're signing off. Thanks again for you guys sticking around. I really one thing. Kenzie sent out a questionnaire, or there was a questionnaire when you registered for the webinar. I know some of you have already filled that out, but it's a real big benefit to us to give us that feedback. So if you want to go back through your, if you got it somewhere, um, go ahead and fill that even after the fact, or just send us an email to sales and whatever kind of feedback, things you would like to know more about. Um, I'd be happy to both take the input or respond, depending on what your inquiry is. So, having said all of that, we're going to sign off, and thanks again for joining us.